The sun hung lazily in the sky, casting golden light over the bustling market. Stalls lined the narrow dusty paths, filled with traders shouting out their wares: fresh yams, smoked fish, bright red tomatoes and fragrant spices. The smell of roasted plantains and groundnut soup mixed with the sharp scent of drying fish, creating a rich aroma that made the air thick with life. In the middle of all this was Coffee. Coffee was just 17, but life had hardened him beyond his years. He was lean and dark-skinned, his ribs slightly visible under his worn-out shirt. His feet, cracked from years of walking barefoot, moved swiftly through the crowd. He was an errand boy, running, lifting, carrying and fetching anything that traders or shoppers needed. He was always in motion like the wind that swept through the market, never stopping for too long in one place. Coffee had no family, no home except for a small wooden shack near the outskirts of the town. His parents had died when he was young, leaving him to fend for himself. But he never complained. He worked hard, saving every little money he earned, dreaming of a future where he would own a small stall, selling goods like the traders he admired. Like any other afternoon. The sun was fierce, baking the earth beneath it. People moved lazily, wiping sweat from their brows as they haggled over prices. Coffee had just finished delivering a basket of onions to a trader and was on his way to collect payment for another errand when a loud, angry voice split through the noise of the market. "Thief! Thief! Someone has stolen my money." The market went silent. Coffee turned toward the source of the voice. It was Victor, the rice merchant. A wealthy man with a belly that jiggled when he walked, Victor was known for his sharp tongue and greed. He stood in front of his stall, his round face red with fury, pointing an accusing finger. "Coffee! I saw you near my stall. You stole from me," Victor shouted. Coffee's heart stopped. A thick knot of fear tightened in his stomach. People were already turning toward him, eyes narrowing. I didn't steal anything," Coffee stammered, shaking his head. A murmur spread through the crowd. "But he was near Victor's stall just now," someone whispered. "He's always running around. Maybe he thought he could get away with it." "No," Coffee said, his voice rising. "I swear I didn't take anything." But in the market a single accusation was enough. Once suspicion took root, it spread like wildfire. Victor took a step forward, his face twisted with rage. "Then let's search him." Before Coffee could protest, rough hands grabbed him from behind. A market guard yanked him back, nearly making him fall. "Check his pockets," another voice shouted. Coffee struggled, panic clawing at his throat. "Stop. This is all a mistake." The guard shoved his hands into Coffee's pockets and pulled out a few notes. His own savings, the little money he had earned that day. "Look. He has the money," a woman cried. "That's my money," Victor roared. Coffee's mind spun. "No, it's mine. I earned that money." But no one was listening. The people in the market didn't see Coffee anymore. They saw a thief. A criminal. Someone who needed to be punished. The first slap came from a trader who had once given Coffee leftover food when he was hungry. The second came from a man who had hired him to carry bags of maize. A hard shove knocked him to the ground. "Thief," someone spat. "I trusted you," another voice shouted. More hands grabbed him, pulling at his shirt, his arms, his hair. A rock was thrown. It hit Coffee's shoulder, sending a sharp pain through his body. Coffee gasped, his breath coming in short, desperate bursts. "Please. You have to believe me." A boot kicked him in the ribs. Another stone hit his back. The crowd had turned into a sea of rage and Coffee was drowning in it. Somewhere deep in his mind a small voice whispered, "This is how I die." A final blow struck his head and his world spun. He collapsed onto the ground, his breath shallow, his heartbeat slowing. The pain faded into a dull ache. His vision blurred. The faces above him melted into the sky, the sun blinding and distant. The last thing Coffee saw before everything went dark was the world moving on without him. The market slowly returned to normal. Stalls reopened. Traders continued selling their goods. The smell of roasted plantains and smoked fish still filled the air. And Coffee's body lay in the dirt, unnoticed. For hours no one spoke of him. No one mourned. His death was a brief moment of excitement in an otherwise ordinary day. The ground absorbed his blood, the dust settling as if nothing had happened. Then as night fell, a cool wind swept through the market, carrying whispers no one could understand. The traders shivered, wrapping their shawls tighter around themselves. The sky darkened. The stars blinked like watchful eyes. Somewhere in the unseen realm between life and death, something stirred. A shadow rose from where coffee had fallen. It moved silently through the market, unseen yet present. And with it came a promise. Justice would come. The night after coffee's death was strangely silent. The market, usually filled with the sounds of late-night traders, drunks and stray dogs rummaging through scraps, felt empty. The air was thick and heavy, as if the earth itself was mourning something it had lost. But no one spoke of him. The next morning the sun rose as usual, casting golden light over the market stalls. People arrived early, setting up their goods, arranging baskets of fresh vegetables and unpacking bags of rice. Victor, the rice merchant, stood in front of his stall, rubbing his large hands together as he watched customers approach. He was in an unusually good mood, chatting with other traders as if nothing had happened the day before. But something was different. The market had always been a lively place full of shouts and laughter, but today it felt off. The usual chatter seemed quieter. The traders worked faster, their hands moving swiftly as if eager to finish the day's business and leave. And then the first strange thing happened. At the far end of the market, near an old abandoned stall, a new rice seller had set up shop. His table was covered with sacks of white rice, neatly arranged as if they had always been there. The rice was pure, cleaner than any other in the market, and it smelled strangely fresh, almost unnaturally so. But what truly unsettled the people was the seller himself. No one had seen him arrive. No one knew his name. He was a tall, lean man dressed in a simple clothes. His skin was dark, his face mostly hidden under a wide straw hat that cast a shadow over his features. He spoke little, his voice deep and slow when he did. He sold his rice at a price lower than any other trader, yet his sacks never seemed to run out. People began whispering. Where did he come from? Has anyone seen him before? It's strange. His rice is always full even though people keep buying. The traders watched him with cautious curiosity, but no one dared to question him directly. Business was business, and if he sold cheaper rice, customers would go to him. But as the day went on, unease settled over the market. That night strange things began to happen. Victor, the rice merchant who had accused coffee, was the first to experience it. After closing his stall, he went home, counting his earnings with a satisfied grin. But as he sat down to eat, his bowl of rice suddenly turned black. It was as if the grains had rotted in an instant, the stench so foul he gagged. Disgusted, he threw it away. But when he looked back at his wooden table, he froze. There, carved deep into the wood, was a name. Kofi. His blood ran cold. He told himself it was just his imagination, just guilt playing tricks on him. He had done nothing wrong. That boy was a thief. A thief. But sleep did not come easily that night. And he was not the only one suffering. The next morning, the market was filled with uneasy whispers. Trader after trader reported strange occurrences. Goods went missing from stalls, but there were no signs of thieves. Some traders woke to find their vegetables rotten overnight, their grains spoiled. Others complained of eerie whispers when they walked home late at night, soft voices calling their names, shadows shifting when no one was there. One woman who had thrown a rock at Coffee the day he died, claimed that her hands would not stop shaking. She dropped every item she picked up, unable to hold anything. Another man who had kicked Coffee woke up with deep bruises on his legs, though he swore he had not fallen or been attacked. The market elders tried to calm everyone. It's just bad luck, they said. The spirits are restless because we have not made our usual offerings. But the traders were not convinced. And the new rice seller continued his business, silent and watchful. 3 days after Coffee's death, something truly terrifying happened. A man named Kojo, one of the loudest voices in the mob that had attacked Coffee, was opening his stall early in the morning when he heard something behind him. A soft rustling like fabric moving in the wind. He turned. Nothing. The market was still empty at this hour. The sun had barely risen and only a few traders were around. He shook his head and went back to unpacking his goods. Then he heard it again. A whisper. His name. Kojo. His breath caught in his throat. His hands trembled. He turned again, slower this time. A shadow stood at the far end of the market. Motionless. Watching. Kojo's heart pounded. He squinted, trying to see clearly, but the figure seemed wrong. Its outline flickered, shifting like smoke. And then, in a blink, it was gone. Kojo stumbled back, knocking over a basket of yams. His breathing was ragged, his forehead slick with sweat. He ran. He ran past the stalls, past the curious eyes of traders who had just arrived, past the new rice seller who stood still watching. Kojo never made it home. By noon, people began asking questions. Where was he? Had anyone seen him? His stall was left open, his goods untouched. By evening, his family came looking for him. By night, the whole market knew. Kojo had vanished. And then people began to panic. The whispers grew louder. People started avoiding the market after sunset. Some even stopped coming altogether. The elders tried to keep things normal, but fear had settled deep into everyone's bones. And through it all, the new rice seller remained. Some claimed they saw him standing in the same spot at night, long after the market had closed. Others swore they heard him whispering under his breath, though no one could make out the words. Then one woman gathered the courage to ask him a question. You have been here for days, but no one knows you. Where do you come from? The rice seller slowly lifted his head, the shadow of his hat slipping away just enough to reveal a glimpse of his face. And in that moment she saw it. A face she had seen before. A face she had helped beat and abandon in the dirt. A face that should have been dead. She gasped and stumbled backward. The rice seller said nothing. He only tilted his head slightly as if amused. The woman ran, her screams echoing through the market. And then the truth began to spread. The rice seller was not just a man. He was something else. Something that had come back. Something that would not stop until justice was served. The market was no longer the place of laughter and business it once was. The once bustling stalls, filled with traders shouting out their prices and customers haggling for the best deal, had grown eerily quiet. Fear clung to the air like a heavy mist, thick and suffocating. People hurried through their transactions, eager to leave before the sun dipped below the horizon. Whispers of Kojo's disappearance spread like wildfire. His family had searched everywhere, his home, the nearby villages, even the riverbanks, but there was no trace of him. It was as if the earth itself had swallowed him whole. Then on the fourth night after his vanishing, something even more terrifying happened. It was late, long after the last trader had left, when the night guards heard something unusual, a soft shuffling sound near the market's entrance. At first they thought it was just a stray dog searching for scraps. But then they heard footsteps. One of the guards, a man named Joe, gripped his torchlight tighter and stepped forward. "Who goes there?" he called, his voice sharp in the silence. No answer. Then from the shadows a figure emerged. It was Kojo. Or at least it looked like Kojo. His clothes were torn, covered in dirt and something darker, something that smelled of rot. His face was pale, his eyes sunken and hollow. He moved like a man half dead, his steps sluggish and unnatural. Joe felt a chill crawl up his spine. "Kojo," he whispered. "Where have you been?" Kojo did not answer. He simply stood there staring. Then without a word he turned and walked into the market. Joe hesitated. Every instinct screamed at him to run. But he was a guard. It was his duty to follow. He took a step forward. Then another. And just as he reached Kojo, the torch light flickered. And Kojo vanished. One moment he was there. The next he was gone, swallowed by the night. Joe dropped the torchlight, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He ran, leaving the market behind, not stopping until he reached the elder's compound. By dawn the whole town knew what had happened. And the fear that had been a whisper became a storm. No one wanted to trade anymore. Some refused to step foot in the market. Others packed up their stalls entirely, choosing to sell their goods in nearby markets instead. Those who stayed worked quickly, avoiding eye contact with the new rice seller, whose presence had grown even more unsettling. His rice remained full, untouched by time. His prices never changed. And no one ever saw him eat, drink, or rest. But the strangest thing of all was his shadow. During the day, it stretched unnaturally long, bending at odd angles even when the sun was directly overhead. And at night, when shadows should have been deep and thick, his was nowhere to be found. Then more people began to disappear. A woman who had slapped coffee the day he died went missing after closing her fruit stall. A butcher who had mocked him was found trembling in a corner of his shop, unable to speak, his eyes wide with terror. He never explained what had happened. He simply left the market and never returned. And every morning near the abandoned stall where the new rice seller stood, the same name appeared, scrawled in the dust. Kofi. The message was clear. The dead were not resting. Not everyone was willing to accept the fear without question. Kwame, a young apprentice working under his uncle, had been watching the rice seller closely. Unlike the others, he had never wronged Kofi. In fact, they had spoken a few times, exchanged jokes while running errands. Kofi had been kind, hardworking, and full of dreams. Kwame found it hard to believe that someone like Kofi would come back as a vengeful spirit. But the evidence was there. The disappearances, the strange occurrences, the whispers in the wind. And then there was the rice seller. The more Kwame observed him, the more certain he became that something wasn't right. The man never spoke unless spoken to. He never seemed to blink. And on the nights Kwame dared to sneak back to the market, he saw him standing there, motionless, long after the last trader had left. One evening Kwame decided to get closer. He waited until the market was almost empty, then slowly approached the rice seller's stall. The man did not react, did not even turn his head as Kwame neared. Swallowing his fear, Kwame spoke. "Your rice, it never runs out. How is that possible?" The rice seller did not answer. Kwame took another step. "Where do you come from?" Silence. A gust of wind blew through the market, making the hanging lanterns sway. Kwame shivered. Then slowly the rice seller lifted his head. And for the first time Kwame saw his face clearly. His breath caught in his throat. The face was familiar. Too familiar. Kofi. But it was not the Kofi he had known. His skin was ashen, his eyes dark and hollow, filled with something ancient and unreadable. Scars covered his neck. Marks from the hands that had beaten him, the rope that had tightened around his throat. Kwame staggered back, his heart hammering. The rice seller simply tilted his head. Then in a voice as cold as the grave he whispered, "They took everything from me." Kwame ran. He ran through the empty streets, his mind racing. There was no doubt anymore. The rice seller was Kofi's spirit. And he was here for vengeance. Kwame burst into his uncle's house, breathless and shaking. "The rice seller," he gasped. "It's Kofi. It's his ghost." His uncle's face darkened. He had heard the rumors, but to hear it confirmed made the hairs on his arms stand. "We have to stop him," Kwame said. "Before more people disappear." His uncle hesitated. "How do you stop a spirit that won't rest?" Kwame didn't know. But he knew someone who might. The next morning, before the market opened, Kwame set off toward the outskirts of town, to the home of an herbalist. If anyone could help put Kofi's soul to rest, it was him. And they would have to act fast. Because the market had become a hunting ground. And the ghost of Kofi was not done. Kwame's legs ached as he hurried along the dirt path leading to the outskirts of town. His breath came in sharp, uneven gasps, but he didn't stop. He couldn't stop. If what he had seen was real, if the rice seller was truly Kofi's vengeful spirit, then the market was in grave danger. More people would disappear. More would suffer. He had to find help. By the time he reached the home of the herbalist, the morning sun had barely risen. The herbalist, known as Nana Ose, was seated outside, grinding herbs with slow, practiced movements. His eyes, milky with age, lifted as Kwame stumbled forward. "You ran here," Nana Ose said, his voice deep and calm. "Something chases you?" Kwame bent over, hands on his knees, catching his breath. "Nana, it's Kofi. His spirit, it's back. It's him. He's the new rice seller." Nana Ose paused, his grinding stone stilling in his hands. "Kofi," he murmured as if testing the name. "The boy who was lynched in the market." Kwame nodded urgently. "He's haunting the market. People are disappearing. And last night I saw his face. It was him, Nana. He's not at peace." The old man sighed and set down his herbs. "When the dead refuse to rest, it is because they were wronged. Kofi was innocent, wasn't he?" Kwame's heart clenched. "Yes," he said. "They killed him for nothing." Nana Ose nodded. "Then his spirit will not leave until justice is done." Kwame swallowed hard. "How do we stop him?" The old man studied him for a moment. "You do not stop him. You appease him. But it will not be easy." Kwame shivered. "What must we do?" Nana Ose stood slowly, leaning on his walking stick. "First, we must uncover the full truth of Kofi's death. Then the ones who wronged him must confess. Only then can we perform the ritual to set his soul free." Kwami's stomach tightened. What if they refuse? The elder's eyes darkened. Then Coffee's wrath will consume them all. Kwame and Nana Ose returned to the market just as traders were setting up for the day. Whispers still hung in the air. About Kojo's return, about the missing traders, about the eerie presence of the rice seller. People eyed Kwame and the old man warily, but no one spoke. Fear had settled too deep. Nana Ose walked with quiet authority, his staff tapping against the ground. He stopped before Victor, the rice merchant, who looked up from his stall, his face pale. "Elder," Victor greeted, forcing a smile. "What brings you to the market so early?" The old man's gaze was piercing. "The spirit of coffee does not rest." Victor flinched. "You were one of the loudest voices against him," Nana Ose continued. "You accused him of stealing. I ask you now, did coffee truly steal from you?" Victor opened his mouth, then closed it. He shifted on his feet. I thought he did. Did you see him take anything?" Victor's throat bobbed. "No, but you let them kill him anyway," Nana Ose said, his voice like iron. The rice merchant's hands trembled. Other traders gathered, drawn by the conversation. The crowd grew, eyes darting between Nana Ose and Victor. Some looked guilty. Others looked afraid. "Did anyone see coffee steal?" the elder asked, his voice ringing through the market. Silence. No one spoke. No one had seen him steal. Because he hadn't. Victor let out a shaky breath. I was wrong. You were not the only one," Nana Ose said, turning to the others. "How many of you threw stones? How many of you struck him? How many of you stood by and let it happen?" Heads lowered. Shame spread through the market. Then one by one voices rose. "I hit him," one woman admitted, tears in her eyes. "I didn't think. I just followed the others." "I called him a thief," another man whispered. "I didn't know for sure. I didn't stop them." More confessions followed. A wave of guilt washed over the market. And in that moment something changed. The air grew colder. A gust of wind blew through the market, knocking over baskets, rattling wooden stalls. The traders shivered, their eyes widening. And from the far end of the market, where the new rice seller's stall stood, a whisper floated through the air. "Justice." Nana Ose wasted no time. He ordered the traders to gather offerings. Bowls of white rice, fresh palm wine, and cloth for mourning. He drew a sacred circle in the dirt, placing a candle at its center. Then he called for the ones who had wronged coffee to kneel. Victor, the woman who had thrown a stone, the butcher who had mocked him, all of them sank to their knees. Kwame's heart pounded as Nana Ose raised his hands and began to chant. His voice was low at first, then it rose, filling the market with ancient words. The wind howled. The lanterns flickered wildly. Then a shadow appeared. It moved through the market like smoke, twisting and shifting until it took form. Coffee. His figure was dark, his face hollow. But his eyes burned with sorrow and anger. The traders gasped. Some tried to run, but Nana Ose's voice cut through the air. "Do not run. Face him. Speak your remorse." Victor's voice broke as he spoke first. "Coffee. I was wrong. I accused you falsely. I let them hurt you. I am sorry." The others followed. Their voices trembled, but they spoke their guilt, their regret. Coffee's shadow did not move. He watched them, silent and unreadable. Then Nana Ose lifted the bowl of rice and poured it onto the ground. "We return to you what was denied. We acknowledge our sins. May your spirit find peace." The wind stilled. The lanterns stopped flickering. Coffee's form wavered. The darkness around him faded. For the first time his eyes softened. Then he smiled, a sad, tired smile. And in the next breath he was gone. A hush fell over the market. The weight in the air lifted. The shadows no longer felt heavy. The rice seller's stall stood empty. And coffee was finally at rest. From that day on the market was never the same. People remembered. They spoke coffee's name not in fear but in mourning. They made offerings at the spot where he had died, ensuring that such injustice would never happen again. The rice seller never returned. But sometimes, late at night when the wind was just right, traders swore they could hear a faint whisper. A voice. "Thank you." The morning after the ritual the market felt different. For the first time in weeks the air was light, free from the choking weight of fear. The eerie whispers were gone. The shadows no longer seemed to stretch unnaturally. And most of all, the mysterious rice seller's stall stood empty as if it had never been there. Yet despite the calm, a deep sadness lingered. Coffee was gone, but the guilt of what had been done to him would never fully fade. The traders who had wronged him walked with heavy steps, burdened by the weight of their own actions. Even those who had been silent bystanders could not escape the knowledge that they had let an innocent boy suffer. But the question remained, how would they move forward? Kwame sat with his uncle near their fruit stall, watching as traders hesitantly returned to their businesses. They moved slower than usual, their voices quieter, as if afraid of waking something that had finally gone to rest. "I still can't believe it," Kwame murmured. "Coffee was here all along and we didn't know." His uncle sighed. "When people act in fear, they do terrible things. And when they refuse to admit their mistakes, the past never truly leaves." Kwame frowned. "Do you think he forgave them?" His uncle didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked toward the empty stall where Coffee had once stood. The wind stirred the dust, carrying it away. "I think," his uncle said finally, "he just wanted to be seen. To be acknowledged. In the end, that was enough." Kwame nodded slowly, but a part of him still ached. Coffee had been a good person. He had deserved a future. He had deserved justice before death, not just after. But at least now his spirit would no longer suffer. As the days passed, the market people decided they could not simply forget what had happened. If they did, it could happen again. So, at the very spot where Coffee had been lynched, they built a small shrine. A simple wooden structure, painted white with his name carved into the front. "Kofi, a boy wrongfully taken." Every morning before the market opened, someone placed a bowl of rice there. Not as an offering to a ghost, but as a symbol. A reminder. Children were told Coffee's story so they would understand the dangers of blind accusations. Traders who had been part of his death visited the shrine often, heads bowed in silent reflection. And over time, though sorrow remained, the fear faded. The market thrived once more, but it would never be the same. It was better. One night, long after the market had closed, Kwame found himself walking alone through the stalls. The moon was high, casting a silver glow over the empty space. He stopped near Coffee's shrine, staring at the carved letters of his name. Then, for the first time since the haunting had begun, Kwame felt something strange, not fear but warmth. A presence, gentle and familiar, like an old friend standing beside him. A soft breeze passed through the market, stirring the lanterns. And in the silence, Kwame swore he heard a whisper. "Thank you." A small smile touched his lips. He placed a bowl of rice at the shrine, then turned and walked away, knowing that Coffee was finally at peace.